Good evening, and thanks very much for joining us. My name is Denise Vigno, and I want to welcome you to Howard Center's Marna and Stephen Wise Tulin Community Education Series. Tonight, we'll be talking about how to make Vermont more welcoming and inclusive for our diverse community. We're so fortunate to have a wonderful group of community partners with us this evening, who you'll meet in just a few moments. Yakuba Bogra, Dr. Marissa Coleman, Yasamine Gordon, Tino Rutenhira, and our moderator, Dr. Jude Smith-Rakelli. We also want to acknowledge and thank Patrick Galasso, an American Sign Language interpreter who will be signing for us tonight. Captioning and transcription are also turned on, and you may easily turn them off on your toolbar if they're not needed. We also want to thank our partner and friends at the University of Vermont Medical Center for their support for our education series. Our format for tonight, it's a webinar, so your audio, video, and chat functions will not be available. There will be a Q&A immediately following our panel discussion. Questions may be sent through the Q&A at any time throughout the session. You may send them anonymously if you wish. And we are recording tonight's discussion, and we'll have it posted at howardcenter.org within just a few days. I'd now like to welcome our panelist and tonight's moderator to the screen, Dr. Jude Smith-Rakelli. Jude is a friend and colleague who has been leading our diversity, equity, and inclusion work at Howard Center since 2015. She's also the CEO and co-founder of Abundant Sun, an international consulting firm. We're just really jazzed to have her here tonight, and all of you. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Denise. And yes, welcome everybody. I understand it's a nice sunny evening in Burlington, so we're very grateful that you are in the room with us this evening. And I think we're due for a very, very good conversation with our panelists today. So I'm going to let each of the panelists give you a little bit of insight into who they are personally, and also what it is that they're doing in Vermont that brings them to us this evening on the panel. So first, I'm going to go over to Dr. Marissa.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining this conversation. I want to thank Dr. Smith-Rakelli for facilitating the discussion, as well as all of my colleagues on the panel. It's an honor to be a part of this conversation with you. I came to Vermont in 2017. I joined the University of Vermont Medical Center in 2018 as a staff psychologist within our psychological services department. I practice psychology from the lens of liberation psychology. So my entree into DEI, I don't know which one started first. I am a psychologist because it's informed by the DEI work that I have done domestically and internationally. And I am a DEI professional now serving as vice president of DEI at the medical center. And that's informed by my practice in psychology. So they're both very intimately intertwined. I would say that moving to Vermont has been an interesting challenge. I felt as though I went through some culture shock when I first moved, and it took some time to find some footing in community. So this conversation is both professionally interesting and engaging for me, as well as I have personal connections to it as well. I would say that within the DEI space at the medical center, we are centering our work and focus on 3 pillars. They funnel up through patients and family, really thinking about how we provide care, recognizing that DEI absolutely impacts our ability to provide culturally humble care. And how can we care for a patient if we don't see their full humanity and know how to make room and space for that in our care dialogue and conversations. And then community, recognizing that we play a really big role in the community around us. As the largest employer in Vermont, we have a duty and a responsibility to care for not only our workforce, but also the patients that we serve and the community that that surrounds us. And so for me, a lot of restorative justice work, it really is at the forefront of my mind and intention when engaging with community in my role. And then finally, people and culture. As I had mentioned, being the largest employer in Vermont, the responsibility we have to care for our employees, to provide safe workspaces where employees feel that they are able to show up and be their full selves is crucial. I view that also as a part of wellness and mental health as well. So I'll pause there, but again, thank you for inviting me into this discussion.
Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to it as well. I understand you're bilingual. What are your languages that you actually speak as part of your competency as a person and professional?
I speak English and yo hablo español también.
También español. Very good. Excellent. Thank you. We're going to hand over right now to get a little bit of insight from Tina.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tinotinda Charles Ritanira. I go by the name Tino or Charles or Tinotinda, and my mother calls me Tinotinda, so save that one for her for the formalities. But I am originally from Zimbabwe, and I also grew up in South Africa. And if any of you are familiar with sort of the apartheid legacy of Southern Africa, you'll realize why I go by two names, an English name as well as a Shona name. That is because in my native country of Zimbabwe, at the time when I was born, it was called Rhodesia. The system of apartheid that was in place had us have English names in order to go to school. And so my school transcripts have Charles as my first name, and my birth certificate and legal documents have Tinotinda as my first name. So when I came to the United States under the refugee program, I used the name Charles because that is where all my degree stuff and everything was written as Charles. So while I'm not here to point out the kind of the racial oppression that happened in pre-apartheid South Africa and Zimbabwe, I am here to kind of just explain too, and the reason I'm kind of bringing this up is to point out that even the most mundane forms of racial oppression, such as having an English name to go to school, can be an albatross around one's neck years after its initial intended impact. And so for me, the work that I'm doing now is very important because I know the dark history of how racial oppression can weigh on you for so long, and that even years after, you still are carrying it around with you and having an impact on just average and almost mundane things like how you answer your phone, because do I answer it as Charles? Do I answer it as Tinotinda? Or do I say, hey, this is 802-555-5555, because I don't know who's going to be calling me and in what context they know me. So I am the co-founder of the Vermont Professionals of Color Network. We are a network that was founded in Burlington in January of 2019. And initially the reason we founded the organization was just to provide a support network for Black and Brown professionals and businesses. We had, I had lived here since I came and hadn't really been exposed to a lot of professionals of color. And so I was just like, where are all my people of color? And so that really was the genesis of how our first meeting was just so that we could see each other and kind of just celebrate being in the same room together. However, after 4 successful meetings in 2019, where we had an average attendance of about 100 people at each event, we started actually realizing like, wow, we're actually onto something that's bigger and more valuable than just meeting and having a couple of drinks. And so COVID provided us an opportunity to kind of take a step back and reassess who we were, what we wanted to be when we grew up. And so during lockdown, we created a board, we created our sort of back office stuff. We came up with a vision and mission statements. And essentially now the goal of this organization, the Vermont Professionals of Color Network, is to build opportunities to improve the experience, representation, and success of BIPOC professionals and businesses in the state, and to usher in a new era of professional mobility. That is really what we're all about.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Professional mobility is really important for community members, particularly coming from, as you said, you've come as a refugee into the Vermont space. I don't know how challenging it is, being born in a country called Rhodesia. I can't even watch documentaries on Cecil Rhodes because he was such a horrible human being. I mean, it is so excruciating. I just cannot do it. So I will be true about that. And it's also a really classic culture coming from what is now Zimbabwe, which used to be Rhodesia, of an example of retributive justice. From what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong. You know, I think that the Zimbabweans flipped it very much and took things from the white Zimbabweans, whereas that wasn't necessarily as much of a response in South Africa. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, actually, funny enough too, in Zimbabwe, there was a civil war between Black Zimbabweans and white Zimbabweans, which took place from about 1965 through until 1980. Whereas in South Africa, there wasn't that war. And so I think part of the results of a war is that you end up with a lot of animosity, and you feel maybe a sense that there's supposed to be payback and retribution, like you're saying. So which ultimately led to kind of dismissal of a lot of white people, taking away their farms and their lands, and having that kind of animosity towards each other. Whereas in South Africa, I think that animosity exists, but I think the power struggle, economic power struggle, hasn't yet actually evolved. I think a lot of white people still own the levers of power, and yeah, it's a very different dynamic.
That's really different. I actually have a very dear friend here where I'm living in Portugal. She's white Zimbabwean, and her parents were murdered, you know, when she was a young girl in that cultural context. So that's not very welcoming at all to people, is it? So thank you, Tino. A lot to work with there. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing with BTPOC. Let's go over to Yakuba. Where are you, Yakuba?
I'm here. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me and allowing me to participate with you and learn from everyone's experience. My name is Yakuba Jacob Ogre. I moved to Vermont in 2003, and I moved here to join my wife, who came before me in 1999. And some of the few friends I met when I first landed was Tino here, and a group of Africans who started our organization, the Association of Africans Living in Vermont. But at that time, it was just a small group of friends who were meeting to discuss about issues they were facing, and also trying to support each other as much as they can. And for those who know Vermont, we are a small state who have been resettling refugees since the mid-80s. But in 2005, 2006, we've seen an influx of refugees coming mainly from Somalia and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and later on few countries in West Africa, such as Togo, Benin, Liberia, because some of these countries have gone through a lot of turmoil. And mainly looking at the groups that came from the eastern part of our continent, many were coming with young children and also elderly population. And there were limited access to language access and to services that were available to them to help them thrive and succeed in Vermont. So the organization sat and thought about restructuring, looking at funding to at least have some staffing so we can provide services. We're able to get small funding from the United Way and the state of Vermont to the state refugee coordinator to start our organization with 3 part-time staff. And it was very difficult to begin with because the needs were there, but we didn't have enough resources to at least support the community that was coming to us for services, but also help those who chose to help their fellow resettled here in Vermont and meet some of their basic needs. And after a year, our executive director quit because the workload was very good. We had 3 part-time staff at that time. And we tried after 6 months and successfully to hire someone. And at that time, I was the board chair, and finally we came to the conclusion that someone need to at least help for the transition until we are able to hire an executive director So I had to leave my job at the University of Vermont and took over in 2009. And since then, I've been the executive director. And today, with the dedicated staff we have, we are able to work with 21 full-time employees, 27 part-time interpreters to provide assistance not only to the African community, but we are able to go beyond and support all the refugee groups that were coming to Vermont and chose to stay in Vermont as they rebuild their lives. But the best thing that happened since then is also seeing how we are able to work across our differences, bringing in new staffing from different community, learning from each other, and trying as much as we can to give back to the state that has given a lot to resettle many refugees coming from war-torn countries. Personally, I was also empowered because I've seen and learning from many folks who have gone through a lot of turmoil experience. That has also helped me rethink about life and see how I can be useful to my community. I used to tell people that I came from a country that has not experienced war prior when I was growing up. And as such, I was able to go through normal school system, learn, and my parents supported me. But not many in this community had this chance. Many kids grew up in refugee camps. They have seen loved ones die. And even when they're here, they can always hear about loved ones dying on a daily basis, being victim of gang activities, being raped. And it's really difficult to rebuild your life if you have to deal with such trauma and continuous trauma. So I think it's a blessing for me also. And I see that in all the staff at ALV, giving their time, trying their best to support their fellows so we can at least build a stable community. And sometimes when you go to meetings and people tell you that we don't need another organization, it's really frustrating. And I've gone through things like that. You know, you walk into providers meeting, instead of greeting you, someone would come and say, do you think we need another organization? Do you think you should invest your time into that? And initially I was really angry, but some people would notice that and come to me and say, do what you think is right. Try your best, at least you wouldn't regret for not trying. And today I can see the result because we have a loving community. We have many people who have dedicated their life to supporting the refugee and immigrant community in Vermont, to the point that today we have a stable organization that is trying its best to give back to the community and serve also their fellow in the state. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yakuba. That is great insight. And I really do, I love the fact that you identify for yourself that you didn't grow up in a war-torn context and that you have the opportunity, you call it a blessing. You have the blessing, right, of having the education and the continuity of that. And those blessings are also privileges in relations to the lives and experiences of other people. So we thank you very much for using your blessing and your privilege to really help pull other people out, which is really phenomenal that we see through AALV. What were, when you were at the University of Vermont, and what were you doing there? And also the skill set that you're bringing into AALV as executive director, where does that all come from? And just tell us a little bit about that, just contextually, if you could.
I have a master's degree in law, and as such has worked 5 years in my country as lawyer before coming here. And when I landed in Vermont, I worked at the Office of Animal Care Management at the University of Vermont for 2 years.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much for that insight. And one question that I have out of curiosity before we move on, you did mention that in AALV, that you worked across your differences. What were some of those differences?
Our African community alone has about 27 different groups that come to ALV. And that also brings a lot of cultures. You have to learn. I came from West Africa, which is completely different than groups coming from the eastern part of Africa or the southern part of the continent. So that's a lot of learning curve for us. and also learning from young men and women who have fled war-torn countries to know about their experience and see how their previous hardship could shape also someone's life is a daunting task. And when we decided, because some of the new groups that were coming from Southeast Asia were coming to our office because they were referred by their friends, their fellow or other providers, we had to learn about their culture also and see what would be the best way to meet their needs and help them be part of the community we want to belong to. And that's what I call, I think it has been a lot of learning for us. And to overcome that, we try to recruit within the communities that were coming to LP, support the staff, train them as much as we can so they can give back and support their fellow also.
Yeah, fantastic. And we're very much looking forward to hearing some of those learning and the insights that you have been able to acquire along your journey, because I know we have many staff in Howard Center who are faced with the same challenges of understanding the cultures that people are coming from. I also think it's really important that we do understand fully and explicitly that people aren't all the same, even though they might be lumped together in a category. There's still a lot of learning that goes on, even inside those groups. So Yakuba, thank you very much. Okay, last but not least, who's been sitting very patiently is Yasmin. Hello.
Hello, Dr. Smith-Rakelli. Thank you so much for the Howard Center for providing us with the opportunity to have this conversation. I think, I see a lot of conversations happening in our community, and being able to bring this forth in a way that is fully accessible to many different people is really exceptional. So thank you so much for having us all here. I am absolutely thrilled to be a part of this conversation. I am Yasmin Gordon. I am the equity director for the city of Winooski currently. I moved to Vermont with my family in 1992 into the good old town of our capital city, Montpelier, and have been here the majority ever since, aside from, moving away to study and then coming back home when that was finished. And I have spent the majority of my career working in public schools in the behavior intervention, behavior specialist, behavior director realm for many, many years before, embarking on this journey as equity director for the city. I tend to lean into this work through empowerment and advocacy, especially for groups of people who aren't typically the folks who are at the table, who aren't typically folks who are having the opportunity to be listened to and considered when there are decisions that are being made. I started to notice in my work in the public school system that there was not a lot of student voice included in a lot of the decisions that were being made about placements, about programming, about supports that were being put in place for students who, are living life through a lens of trauma, who are living life through a lens of not having a lot of opportunity and resources. And I started to wonder about that, and I started to really speak up in the school buildings and with my colleagues, and think about and encourage people to think about different ways to approach creating programs and creating systems that are more inclusive and more holistic and included student voice. And that really was, part of the beginning of my journey into this work. I think that I gravitated toward that because of my own experience moving here as a 10-year-old, and almost 10-year-old actually. I turned 10 the summer that we moved up here, and I started my 5th grade school year at Main Street Middle School in a very different environment than I had ever experienced growing up. And entering into Main Street Middle School as one of the only students of color. I was the only Black student in the entire school, 5th through 8th grade, and thinking about the experiences that I had growing up and what would have changed and what would have been different for me, and the development into my adulthood and how I developed my own identity had I had a voice in the decisions that were being made for me, was really the driving force into me beginning to advocate for those who are unheard. And so, working with the city of Winooski, that is very much the goal of the work that I am in charge with. The city is really starting that journey of beginning to hold up the mirror to itself and look at internally, understanding why they are not matching, why they don't represent and have full representation of what their community looks like. The city of Winooski has been a refugee welcoming community for many decades, and there is still very clearly a lot of segregation that is happening within that community, and it is being lived through the folks who are living in that experience and having that experience have not always and very much have not typically had the opportunity to talk about their experiences and to really start to name the inequality that they are facing on a daily basis. And the city a few years ago held a summit that they called the Equity Summit, where they invited many community partners in, residents in, to actually start to begin that conversation. And the city leaders really started to understand that there's a lot of information lacking. There's a lot of perspective lacking within how the city is engaging with their community and the things that they are providing, the services that they are providing for their community. And so, they asked me to come on board to help them really start to understand what is the driving factor, where are the drivers for inequality that are happening within their current structures that are creating these unequal outcomes for the residents. And so that is my main charge, working in the city, which I think is very much aligned with my entire reasoning for being in this work. So I wanted to just keep it short because I know that we're a little bit short on time and would love to start moving into the conversation. But I'm really thankful to be here.
Great to have you here, and thanks for all that you're doing in Winooski as well. So you are our only person on the panel who has a long tenure in, well, actually, I don't know. I didn't actually, 1992. So what is that? That's 30 years we're into. And through the whole arc of your lifetime. So you've got quite a good perspective there as well. Okay, well, thank you to each of you for your introductions, just to give us a little bit of personal and professional insight and a really good sense of what you're doing in terms of your stellar contributions to Vermont. So thank you for that as we go. So the panel is really about, how can we make Vermont more inclusive and welcoming to our diverse communities? Now, I'm very aware of the fact that everybody on this call is coming from what would be categorized as a BIPOC community, Black and Indigenous people of color, whilst it actually says in our title, diverse community. So I just want to put it out there that diversity is a heck of a lot more than skin color, even though we might not see a lot of it in our panel and in me today, but I definitely want to make sure that we have a conversation beyond the obvious as we go. So, let's think about Vermont. And there's an enormous amount of conversation going on in our state about how important diversity is for the evolution and development of our great Green Mountain state. That we need people, that we have aging populations. There's so many challenges that are out there. And we can only really get there by attracting people, but also taking care of people who are already here. So I don't know if the panelists have any thoughts on that. Yasmin, you have longstanding tenure here. I'm always a little bit concerned that we're only ever really talking about newcomers, and we don't always really look at the people who have long tenure in Vermont, who are diverse. And so I would just defer the floor really, and if you've got any thoughts about how we can ensure that we are welcoming to our diverse population who's already here, not people that we're trying to recruit into the state. So feel free. Yes, Marissa.
I have some thoughts about that, but yes, Yasmin, I'm looking at you because I feel like I need to defer to your experience of living here for so long. There's a part of me that's like, whoa, I want to hear about how that has been. I'll just keep it short. For me, I feel like so much of that sits at collaboration and partnership. It's acknowledgement of like the richness and the strengths that are already within our state, and how do we connect people and resource the work and the efforts that have already been underway. That feels so important. It's one thing to say, I recognize that diverse communities have so much to offer the state and we can benefit from their knowledge, but how are they and us and we benefiting from the partnership where there is a reciprocal dynamic of give and take and really sharing. And that's something that I would like to see more of. And I think there are some exciting efforts in that space, particularly Tino, your organization, I think does that really, really skillfully.
Thank you. Since you name checked me, I'm going to respond. But I am actually also curious to hear what Yasmin has to say as well about sort of having some tenure in this. But for me, I think the thing too is the fact that we focus on new people mainly because the people that are already accounted for, the BIPOC people that are already accounted for here, the only way we can grow that is by bringing more BIPOC people to the state. Vermont is 80% white, and it's the second whitest state in the country. So, but the declining population is going to mount a really, really serious challenge to Vermont's economy. When you're just talking about economics of, at least when I think about our organization and what we're looking at, is the fact that we need people in the state for the long-term future of this country, and people of just any kind of person. But primarily when we're talking about bringing in people, we're talking about bringing in diversity. So the declining population is going to pose us a challenge. So we need to add to those numbers. Mathematically, it means that Vermont is going to continue to age at a faster rate than pretty much every state in this nation. Demographically, it also means that if we don't bring more people here, there's going to be fewer students in schools. There's going to be more people over the age of 65. There's going to be fewer people in their prime working ages. And then economically, it means that it becomes difficult for organizations to find workers to replace those retirees. Existing businesses will fail to grow and prosper. And then the people that are here will have to kind of hold up this shrinking tax base and get taxed more, because otherwise there's no way to look after these people. So I guess the fact that Vermont is dying in a figurative and literal sense means that we need to have people here. So while we're bringing people here, then the case that we're making is, let's make those people diverse. Let's bring in BIPOC people. Let's attract BIPOC individuals to the state so that we can then, while we're growing the numbers of the state, we can also grow the number of BIPOC people, the number of diverse people. And so I think that's where the whole kind of angle of looking at recruitment is important, although I think there is a case to be made about the retention piece of it as well.
Absolutely. I think that Marissa and Tino, both of you, are speaking to, building connections between the newcomers and between, what I like to call the sophomores, the sophomore Vermonters, the folks who have been here for a few decades. Because I think what, in my experience growing up, I didn't have a lot of connection to other people who came from similar backgrounds, who even looked like me. And so while I absolutely loved, I enjoyed growing up in the city of Montpelier. I had many friends. It's a small town, it's a small community. Everybody knows everybody. People rally around and support each other in really big ways. However, when it came time to have some difficult conversations, when my brother and sisters and I were having experiences, with our friends in schools, out in the, in the community, the only people that we had to turn to were my parents. There wasn't a support structure for us as students within our schools to be able to really talk through some of the microaggressions that we, that I now know as an adult were microaggressions. When I was younger, I wasn't able to understand what was happening when I started to feel like I was a bit of a, when I started to feel like the people who I was engaging with were only engaging with me because I was different, because I was new, because I came from a different place than them. I started to feel as if folks weren't really looking at who I was on the inside, and they were very much focused on the fact that I looked a certain way. And without having those supports, I think, and those connections of people who look like me, people who I can identify with, people who were a part of my own in group, that was a glaring gap in in the development of my identity, growing into an adult within the state. And it took me leaving the state, finding those pieces, those missing pieces that I didn't have growing up, and then coming back to the state of Vermont to really start to understand that I wanted to do the same for the youth that were coming up behind me. And so I think that, what the Vermont People of Color Network is doing is extremely important. That's something that I bet my parents wish had existed when they were bringing this up, because that space to really be able to grow and connect with people in your own community that are facing the same type of challenges as you is extremely holistic, extremely healing. And that's what the Vermont People of Color Network is doing. They're providing that space. I think that, when I was a newcomer, I needed that. I think that my family needed that. And so now that there are even more newcomers that are coming into the state, we are seeing more diverse populations come into the state. I really would urge, I think it's a really wonderful idea for us to start thinking about how the state as a whole can start making those connections for people so that folks immediately and instantly have those systems of support. I think that would absolutely, help with the rates of retention for people of color who are coming into the state and then leaving rather quickly afterwards.
It seems like a fairly rapid exodus, but we'll get there in a minute, right? Yakuba, something you want to say on that score?
Yes, I think as a state, we still have a long way to go. I don't think the state and also service agencies or organizations here are trying to empower the little knowledge they have on board. Many organizations are struggling to retain a diverse population because they are not willing to provide or give enough time to supporting newcomers at their workplace. They are not looking to go to our state colleges to recruit and promote their organization or their agencies, to the point that some of the young people who are finishing within our state system have nothing to do. They have to leave the state and market their skills, while we could have used those skills in state here because we have invested so much in training them and having them stay in Vermont and building a network in Vermont. Imagine someone struggling to even have an internship. Or after your internship, you are placed to the same level of someone else when he is recruited and you have the same courses, you went to the same school and you had almost the same hours of internship, and you are told that you don't have enough experience. No one would be born with some experience. You learn at your workplace, and your employer, your supervisor should put enough resources to support you if they really think that you are of value to your community or to your workplace. Now, we try at ALB to recruit folks from different levels of education. And what we do is investing resources into their training, supporting their education through the state colleges here, either at CCV or at UVM. It's not a lot of resources that we put in, but we think that we hope that these people, even if they leave ALB, they can give back to their community, at least in Vermont. But sometimes it's really hard to do so because they would be hired by other organizations and a few months later they would leave because they don't see the same level of support they had when they were working here at ALB. And they would come to complain. But we try to ask them to push back because they should also have their supervisor understand that if they have resources they want to share, they should also value the talents they are bringing. And it's hard for someone to prosper at the workplace if you don't have the right support. You can be thrown into your workplace and given a lot of work to do, but if you don't have the right support, you will fail. And it's not because you are incapable of doing your work, it's because people expect you to succeed right away without a lot of support. And this is also why our state system should look at investing or retaining our young kids, the young men and women who are graduating from the state system, investing into their training and supporting them to stay in Vermont instead of looking to hire from outside of the state. Because people would always come, even if they're willing to work and they don't have enough support at their workplace, they will leave. And the support is the most important thing to retain your staff.
Yeah.
If you're not willing to invest time to supporting them, looking and listening to their need, they will leave automatically because they don't have a community within the workplace to prosper.
And that's going to be thank you so much for that, Yakuba. And that'll be the case for individuals, right? In terms of people needing support, but there may be specific types of support that are required given somebody's diverse background, where they're coming from and what their needs are that need to be understood. So thank you for that. And we're hearing very much the relationship, the need for reciprocity and the sharing is really important for the building of community and enabling people to feel connected and a part of things, and that we're working together and for one another for the betterment of all of us. There's also something that we're hearing, many people, particularly from a BIPOC background, I don't necessarily like that word because there's so much diversity inside of it, it doesn't mean anything really. But that there has been historically a real call for people to have to create their own spaces in order to find the support and the encouragement and the developmental opportunities. So I think we've got some really good foundations with that. All of you and all the work that you're doing professionally in the organizations, stellar. And how can we begin to build some of those bridges of collaboration that you speak about as well, this as we're going through. Vermont is dying. That sounds terrible, Tino. I said, what do you mean it's dying? Oh yeah, it could be quite alarming. But there is, well, the world isn't in too good a shape, and I think we've got to be really honest and realistic, and not sort of candy coat things with some of the challenges that we're confronted with. So there are some big glaring gaps in that as well. And just to end with this segment of our discussion, and Yakuba, you really mentioned something that brought to mind for me was this whole notion of mentorship, right? How we, and you were saying it as well, and Yasmin, like you knew when you got out of Vermont that you wanted to come back and actually help pull people up. And that means that you're stepping into a very active mentorship role to help others feel included and more at ease, and as though they have the power to do things, right? To achieve their goals and their aspirations. And I'm often very struck by people who, as you were saying as well, Yakuba, when you walk into a room and people are like, do you really think you need to be here? It's like, what? That's not nice. And it's the same piece when people say, why do you need a mentor? What do you need a role model for? Why can't you just do it on your own? How does that feel? Where does that take us in terms of inclusion and belonging and welcoming? I'll yield the floor for your discussion.
I think from a professional perspective, because sort of that's always the angle I'm looking at in my role here, we all need somebody who gives us a chance, who opens a door for us. And whether it is a person who you work with or you report to, or your mom or your dad or maybe an uncle who leaves you an inheritance, it all kind of amounts to nobody kind of does it on their own. No matter who you are, there's always somebody who gives you that opportunity. And that's really one of the things that we're looking for and looking at with the Vermont Professionals of Color Network, is to create, those opportunities for people of color, particularly professionals, as we start to sort of navigate the landscape. When I look at my personal life and my career, I had a door open for me by somebody who then, in that opportunity, allowed me to sort of showcase my own talents and skills, whereas before I wasn't in a position to do that because nobody gave me the time of day. And then now, years later, look at where I am. I'm not saying that I've made it, but in terms of breaking through some barriers and navigating the landscape, I feel like because somebody else afforded me that opportunity, I should be able to now look around me and pick that person up and help other people. I'll just kind of quickly tell you about one of the reasons how I started thinking about creating the Vermont Professionals of Color Network. I was mentoring, and I'll go really quickly because I don't want to take up too much time, but I was mentoring a young man who was at Champlain College.
You don't have to talk don't talk so fast, right? Because we also have somebody interpreting. So
yeah, that's true.
Be easy.
I was mentoring a young man who was a senior in Champlain College in about 2015. And he was doing finance, and yet he was also working at a manufacturing company, a local manufacturing company, packing stuff, in a third shift job. And I couldn't help but think to myself, this young man, like he was a first generation college student, and, thinking to myself, like, if this young man were white, would his parents or his brother or sister allow that to happen? Wouldn't they maybe use their professional contacts to get them into a job that is, or at least an internship that actually works, that would allow them to utilize his finance degree? I also started to think to myself, like, this young man wouldn't be equipped to hit the ground running. When you're comparing him when he graduates, his resume compared to maybe a white kid's resume, probably that white kid has got some experiential opportunities that came across his way because somebody maybe gave them that opportunity. Additionally, I started thinking to myself, like, somebody at that company could have looked at this kid's resume and thought, like, oh, this kid is a senior in college and he's doing accounting. Why don't we bring him into our accounting department or something like that? And so I couldn't help but think to myself, like, how many more kids of color out there are like this kid that have picked a job that pays over relevant work experience in order to make ends meet, over maybe an unpaid internship that would give them relevant experience? And so that alone was what made me think, like, we need to see how many more kids are out there and help them. Even though ultimately the Vermont Professionals of Color organization doesn't necessarily just focus on the mentorship piece for young people, that mentoring piece is really, really important because you need people to be looking out for you. And we all are learning as we go. We don't have all the answers. And particularly when you think of the young people, these are 22-year-olds, 21-year-olds. They don't really know what they're doing. So we want to make sure that we give kids the opportunities to kind of latch on to somebody who's kind of gone through the process and can help them navigate the job scene so that when opportunities come up for them, they're better positioned to take them up.
Thanks, Tina.
One of the things that we talk a bit about at the medical center is this idea of reverse mentoring as well. I agree with everything Tino said about it being our responsibility to think about the next generation. And as we enter into spaces, how do we make room to bring others with us and or create some opportunities? This idea of reverse mentoring is also, I really appreciate it because in some ways it dismantles the power hierarchy that can be at play within mentorship relationships. It acknowledges that somebody that may be younger or maybe more junior in their career path still has a lot of wisdom and skill and knowledge to offer, particularly if they are paired up with a mentee that may be more senior in their career, but maybe lacking some insight into specific diversity dimensions or may not know what the specific needs of a employee of color are, right? And so then somebody more junior in their career can offer some of that insight and there can be some reciprocity there in the dynamic. I think that it's important for mentors or mentees to feel empowered. I feel pretty strongly that particularly communities of color are often tapped and valued and recognized when we expel free labor. And that historically has so many roots, obviously, within our country and many other societies around the world. And so when we think about internships, who gets picked for the paid internships? How do we let our younger people even know about what the opportunities are? So at the medical center, we often are looking at different pipeline programs, through LNA or partnering with UVM or other area universities. And how do we get people that are younger to really expand their understanding of what careers in healthcare can look like? That it isn't just people that went to medical school, that there are so many other ways to have careers in healthcare. And so, those are just some thoughts that come to mind.
Thank you, Marissa.
Within the city of Winooski, we just completed an equity audit for the city. And one of the findings that came from that equity audit were that within the municipal employee structure of the city, women of color in particular, and women in general, were being placed into positions that we categorize as caretakers within the city, right? And so, the city's goal is to diversify across the board, especially within positions of leadership. And, even when you're examining my position and what I'm doing within the city, it often gravitates towards supporting the community, advocating for the community, which could also be categorized as a caretaking type position. And so, the discussions that we're beginning to have is, what can we as a city do to develop pathways for folks who enter into some of those, junior level positions, some of those hourly positions as recreational staff, or, program staff that are, working for the pool, working for our Thrive programs and things like that. How can we begin to teach some of those employees through mentoring processes, through affinity spaces, through peer-to-peer mentoring, mentorship opportunities that are going to start to build upon their skills, so that there's the possibility for them to receive promotions along the way and rise into other positions across the board of leadership within the city, and possibly cross-train into different departments. One of the first tasks that I actually completed when I began the work was to develop a mentoring program to do just that. That was specifically geared towards women of color in the workplace, to help them gain, skills and insight and the opportunity to cross-train within different departments in the city. Year one is really creating an affinity space with the mentees and with myself as the mentor, as the only Black female that on the leadership team, and mentoring all of them, and just creating that safe space, creating that sense of community within the workplace is really the first step. And then the second year will be more focused on partnering with other people who are in leadership positions that have, skill sets and goals that are more geared towards, different types of departmental staff, like taking the transferable skills that the mentees have in their current positions and figuring out ways that they can go into different departments and use the skills that they're already, that they already possess, to start to build on job training and workforce training in different departments, public works, zoning and planning, the city clerk's office, finance, to really start to build those pathways for people to rise up into positions of leadership. Because, I think the average, lifespan of a municipal employee is like 3 to 5 years, because of the nature of the job. And if that's the case, there's a lot of turnover. So there, in theory, should be a lot of opportunity for people who are already in positions within the city to rise into leadership positions within the city. And so that's a lot of conversation. It takes a lot of teaching and education around thinking about different ways to look at our workforce development strategies within the municipality, to gain that, that insight, and to gain those systems where we can actually uplift the wonderful folks that we already have working for us, instead of, trying to just focus on that external piece when we're hiring consultants to come in and do a whole strategy around recruitment, outside of Vermont, it's really trying to hone in and focus on what we already have, because there's such a wealth of opportunity for those who already live within our community. If we are able to just create the system for them to enter into and feel like they're a part of and feel like they have the capability of moving into something that's bigger and better. So that's I think that's something that Vermont could do, that we actually have the opportunity for right now.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Last
I
but
would
not
like
least-
to share that here at ALB, we've started a youth mentoring program right before COVID, and the need to support our young men and women became dire during COVID, because some of these kids are coming from families that have not had a chance where parents have not had a chance to go to school, and it's hard for them to work with the kids, help them with their homework. Or imagine someone living with a single mother and having to take care of his own brothers and sisters and not being able to access basic education during COVID. And what we did during COVID is to rely on young students from UVM, Champlain, and also some of the young professionals here to help at least these kids, support them with their homework, accessing their portal, and reviewing their grades so they can communicate with the guidance counselors to see how they can better support the kids. And after 6 months in 2020, we've seen how the kids' lives have been impacted. Their grades went from close to 0 to close to 10, and we've seen a lot of progress. And that has also pushed us to expand our youth mentoring program. We started with 17 kids. Today we have 49 kids that comes on a regular basis at ALB to get support from some of the young students or some of the professionals that are here. And last year, one of the Dr. Palm took some of these kids to visit colleges in state first and also at our university. And I think these are some of the small steps that can also empower the kids to see that there is a better future if they want to put their minds at the right place. And these are things that we hope to expand in the coming month and reach out to more professionals so they can support these young kids, help them access the new employment opportunity, and look at how they can also be part of this professional network so they can foster their earning and also a better education down the road. Also support the young brothers and sisters so the parents don't have to always worry about their future.
Lovely, excellent. So no one in this world does it on their own. That's really, really important. And we really need to think about, if we're looking at how we make it more inclusive for diverse communities, that we're making sure that we have these social systems and these social networks of support in place in order to enable people to have the pathways for their own personal growth and development and the achievement of their goals. So that is incredibly essential, whether it's through reverse mentoring, whether it's like, it sounds a little bit also like a buddy program as well that's in place to support people. I think it's wonderful. I don't want to lose, Marissa, your comment about free labor. I'm not impressed when people say now, we want to pay you for your labor. I was like, well, that's not really what we're looking for. We're not looking to labor, okay, because that's unskilled work. That's really hard and manual usually. So I would just also, as a word of support out there, to say to people, let's not think about paying people for their labor, because many people are not laborers. They're professionals. They need to be respected as that. The last thing I'm going to do before we're going to open up to get into the Q&As, and thank you everybody for dropping some questions into that box there. I'm going to head in momentarily. I'm also hoping that some of the questions, some of the discussions that we've had are answering some of your questions already. But we're talking about welcoming, right? We're talking about making sure that people are feeling respected and that they're safe, right? We talked about safety earlier. Safety is like, isn't that just something that's basic that should be in place? Like that, we shouldn't be getting prizes for people being safe every day, right? In a civil society, I mean, come on, right? So what about, can we do more than just make it safe? I was in a meeting just this week and somebody said, well, we want to make sure that we're not doing harm, like help us make sure we're not harming people in our meetings because of our whatever. And I was like, well, that's a pretty much of a deficit attitude of like harm reduction. Is that all welcoming is? Like making sure I don't hurt you? Like, can we have some fun? Can we make this sort of enjoyable, this relationship and this communication? So where have you actually enjoyed life here and really felt as though you've been able to have fun and be yourself and at ease? And how has that happened? Because I'm sick of just hearing about harm reduction all the time.
I personally, I'll just say that I think that I'm still on that journey, right? I think I'm still, as a grown adult woman, Black woman, trying to, while I have moments of fun, I absolutely find joy. I've found joy throughout my entire life. I've found it in different ways with different communities. And I can't say, that there is a specific time or a specific community in my childhood or in my past where I have felt like I have been able to express myself as a Black woman 100% wholly. There's been very few times, I could probably count on both my hands the amount of times where I really feel like I've been in a group where I can not have to think about code switching in my speech. I mean, I'm doing it now. I'm doing it thinking about the fact that I'm on a webinar with, who knows watching, and the fact that this is going to be recorded and put up on a website. I'll just be honest about that. This is not how I typically sound when I'm hanging with my family.
But I'm noticing your head's doing a little bit more like this. She's getting into it. Right?
Yeah, and I think those who know me definitely understand that code switching has been a challenge, and it's been something that I have been challenging myself as an adult to try to do less and less.
Can you just define for our audience what code switching is, because people might not be familiar with the phrase?
Right. So code switching is basically adjusting your pattern of speech, adjusting the language that you use depending on who your audience is. And so it's something that, definitely affects people of color in quite a large way, quite an intense way, because culturally, there are many different types of cultures within people of color. There are many different type of languages spoken, many type of cultural backgrounds. And when we feel like, when I feel like I'm going into a white-centered space, I will change the way that I'm talking in order to be acknowledged and in order to be and feel respected by that group. So it's something that we're constantly having to kind of navigate back and forth depending on who it is that our audience is. And so, something that I always talk about when I think about my childhood and where I am now as, and myself, is my name. I think about that a lot, is the fact that my name is Yasmin, but I did not grow up in Vermont as Yasmin. I grew up in Vermont as Yasmin, because when I arrived to Vermont as a 10-year-old, that's the name that my fifth grade teacher decided they were going to call me, because Yasmin was too difficult for them to say. And so there was only a small handful of people, my close friends and family that I grew up with, that actually called me by my first name or called me by the nickname that I chose, which was Yas. And once I grew up and I left the space and I started using my proper name again, I realized that I didn't really understand what my name would like, what my proper name, how that impacted my growth and how that impacted me developing into the person that I am. So when I came back to Vermont, I started more and more slowly, and I'm still getting there. I still have to work on it, asking people to call me by my given name. And am just really starting to reconcile with how much that affected and impacted my identity as a grown woman. And so that's kind of like code switching to the extreme, right? That's something that impacted my sense of self. It impacted my development growing up, and I'm having to kind of come back as a 40-year-old person, reclaiming that identity that was lost when I first came here. And so, even though on the soccer field, when my nickname at the time was like Yasmanian Devil, which I thought was hilarious, and I still hold very, very positively, which I I do hold joy in the fact that that was my nickname. There's still a tiny bit of an air of that's not truly my name, and that's not even really a part of my name, but it became part of my identity. So, when you talk about celebrating and how we find joy, I think it depends. For me, it absolutely depends on who I'm with and where and what I'm doing. I will say though that, one of the things that I do love, absolutely adore about Vermont is how we very much take care of our environment, how there's so much a focus on sustainability and really respecting the outdoor spaces that we have and the beauty of them. I think, if you move to Vermont and you don't love the outdoors, that can be a whole other conversation, right? I think it will be really hard to kind of find your footing here. But, luckily I definitely do. And it's something that I find a lot of healing in the outdoor spaces that we have here. I find a lot of healing in the accessibility of the outdoor spaces that we have here, which I find really wonderful. So that's personally how I find joy.
Excellent. Thank you. Anybody else having fun out there in Vermont, which has made life easy?
So, I appreciate that question, because so much of the conversations that we can have are from a deficit standpoint, right? Or from a harm reduction standpoint. And that was something difficult for me to get used to when I moved here. I moved from Atlanta, and before that I was in Miami and then Chicago. And so I wasn't used to always needing to talk about the the negative impacts of racism. I was aware of it, of course, and had experienced my own experiences, but I didn't always have to lead with that or deal with the assumption that when people were trying to connect with me, they assumed that that's what I wanted to connect about, that was the main identity that I was leading with. And it took a while to get used to that.
That's so Vermont there, right? I mean, it
is. I'm like, we can talk about a bunch of other things. I'm so much more than just my race. But with that said, my family is here because we moved up here for my spouse's job. It is a choice. It's a choice every single day. We don't have family here. So we're here because we're enjoying it and we're choosing to have fun. We love to ski as a family. That's been a really big hobby that gets us through the winter. The mountains and the water, proximity to Boston and Montreal, those are things that are really valuable to us. And then I'm a mother of 3 young children. So if my children are enjoying themselves and they are running wild in open spaces and feeling free to explore, for the most part, I'm good. As long as they are, happy and joyful and enjoying a safe childhood. And I understand we can define safety in many different ways, but physically safe here, I feel like I have an element of peace that I would not have if I was in a larger city that I used to live in. Now, with that said, it comes with a cost. But the joy and the fun, to me, that is what I devote my time and energy to when I am not working. So I don't attend all of the things about racial justice always in the community when I'm not at work, because I need a break. I need some reprieve and be able to connect with people outside of just the DEI lens. One last thing that I'll mention is, finding community has been interesting and at times tricky for me, primarily because I entered the community solely as a psychologist. And so having to make the choice of, is this going to be a friend or a patient? And needing to figure out which spaces I can go into that I do not have dual relationships. And so in my field, in my profession, that is another, I would say, occupational hazard that I didn't have to intentionally navigate in larger cities. Here, it's something I think about constantly, and it's just been something I've had to learn to adapt to.
Yeah, interesting dynamic. Thanks for sharing that. So swiftly on to either Tino or Yakuba, anything on, let's not always concentrate on harm reduction because that's just really depressing. And where's the fun in it? Anything?
Sure, I can jump in and just say that there's been an influx of white professionals and their families relocating to Vermont from metro cities like Boston, New York, Philly, etc. And they come to settle here in Vermont. They are coming in search of what? In search of a higher quality of life, the wide open spaces, and the nature. And what I've discovered is that I'm not sure why that message of, the quality of life, the open spaces and stuff hasn't been preached to BIPOC communities in those same metro cities, because now that I'm here, when I think about the fact that like the great schools and the mountains and the lake and the hiking and all that stuff has become quite important to me, and I enjoy it. And I feel like other BIPOC people would enjoy it as well if we made it known to them. But I think we have, we've kind of kept it a secret almost. And I'd love for us to sort of espouse all the good stuff about Vermont to other BIPOC people so that they too can know about the wonderful things that we enjoy here, the great schools, the quality of life, the open spaces, the lake, Montreal being like 2 hours away from Burlington, that sort of stuff. I mean, I enjoy that about Vermont, and I would love to try to make a case for it to the folks that are also living in Boston and in New York and the Philly suburbs to consider Vermont being home.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks.
Now, for me, I find joy in what I'm doing on a daily basis. A few years ago when I came, I was the only one from my country here. That has pushed me to go out and meet other fellow, so I can build a network of friends. But since I've started working at ALB, learning from people hardship, I've come to know that we always take things for granted until we lose what is dear to us, like loved one or our work or even our own country. And seeing people going through such hardship, trying to rebuild their life and coming back to you one day and say, I'm bringing my son just to let you know that he's graduating tomorrow. Can you attend his graduation? Mm-hmm. I'm coming just to see how you are doing, because I'm working. I don't have issue. I've not seen you for a while. I'm coming to see how you are doing here at ALP. It's bringing me some joy. And I see that the network of support we're able to build, all the volunteers that have given their time to support families that were coming from the difficult situation is paying off. And that's also help us build a safe community. Because if we are able to rebuild our lives, if we are able to look forward and having a purpose again for our lives, we will have a safer place to be. And that also is the beauty about Vermont. We have a small community that you can reach out to easily. Sometimes you face difficult situation, but if you look around, you will always find a helping hand. Someone who is willing to give up so much to come and help. Someone who is willing to ask you to leave your child so you can go for your errands or babysit for you while you are trying to find a stable daycare and you are working to provide for your family. And this is also some of the beauty of Vermont here. We don't have to struggle a lot as other huge metropolitan area, but we can always find this support within our neighborhood and build a safer place for all of us. And that's also what I like about Vermont. I don't have to deal with the traffic or the gunshots. One of our family left here a few years ago to Minnesota, but they came back 3 months later and said the neighborhood where they were living was just every night they were hearing gunshots. And that's reminded them their home country, all the war they fled, and they couldn't stay there. They came back.
Excellent. Look, panelists, thank you. So I think that's a great note to end on. And Tina, I'm going to challenge you. I don't think Vermont's dying.
I meant that from a
I know
from a demographic perspective. We are the second oldest state in the country.
I get you. I'm just teasing. I'm teasing, right? We're having fun. All right, let's head into, we've got about just under 10 minutes left, and I'm going to go into some of the Q&A pieces here. Somebody asked if you had a most successful initiative to date around inclusion. Well, I think we've spoken a lot about that. We've spoken a lot about mentorship. We've spoken a lot about just the community building, the outreach. So let's say that that's sufficient for the now. If let's see if there's something.
Jude, can I say something about that question while you're looking at some of the others? You know, I think something that sounds so simple, but can be really hard to do is just to listen. I found that listening has probably been one of the most effective things within the DEI space that I occupy. You know, just giving people the room and the space to talk and share their experiences, and then actually actively listening and doing something about it, versus filling up time with a bunch of programs and only events and not crucial and authentic dialogue, particularly when people are holding pain. I found doing that has really been impactful.
Yeah. And I've certainly found people don't often feel comfortable with the dialogue. They want to leap into the action and the solutions without having the dialogue. They feel that dialogue is counterproductive and ineffective. So that's something to look at. This conversation has been about just diversity and inclusion and welcoming. Martha put in, is this about attracting people of color to Vermont or determining ways of making communities more inclusive? All of that. And not just mostly for African Americans. I want to say really clearly, the title is around diverse communities in Vermont. How can we make it more welcoming? We definitely have ourselves on the call today that are coming from particular obvious backgrounds of being BIPOC, but please listen, right, to what we're saying and how we're talking, because we're talking about systems that need to be in place. And you have to be able to extrapolate, okay? So this isn't just a conversation about Black and brown people, but the importance of mentoring, the importance of communication, the importance of reciprocity. It exists for everybody in every community. So please don't just be superficial and myopic that this is just about BIPOC. This is just a conversation that you're happening to listen to, that we are all having, and we're glad that you're here. How do you respond when the leadership in municipalities say that change takes time and that their strategy is in small incremental steps? This person feels that it's too long overdue change. So
Can I answer that?
Yeah, go for it.
I think it's a cop-out. People saying that, you know, Vermont has 600,000 people. Like, there is no reason why we cannot effect change within like a 3-year time period. We don't need a 20-year plan to effect change in the state. I mean, if we were a city, we would be the 25th largest city in the country. We wouldn't even be in the top 20. So I think it's time for change. I agree with the person that wrote it. Change is long overdue, and we need to actually start to not just ask for the change, but to demand the change from our legislators, from our leaders, etc. Because the state is small. Like, the population-wise, it's small. We can make things happen in the state without needing acts of Congress and stuff. That is my opinion.
Thank you very much, Tina. I'm actually really enjoying Patrick and the interpretation. Is that demand? What is that?
That's a sign for now.
Now, okay. Now. I like that. Okay. That was good. Thank you. I'm learning signs again. Okay, excellent. Yeah, the time is now. Like, what now? What are we waiting for? Okay, excellent.
Do you mind if I just respond to that as well, just for 1 second, because that is definitely a part of my role. I feel like I get that on a daily basis in my job. And so, you know, my response to people is like, okay, yeah, but what are you going to do tomorrow? Right? It's like, there's always something that can be done. Let's identify what that thing is and then just do it. You know, like there can be a lot of talk about, you know, where the money is going to come from and where the resources and this, that, and the other. But I think there is a time and a place where we have to start holding individuals accountable for making a step towards the work at the very least, because steps towards progress are always possible. And so I really, you know, encourage and invite conversations around, you know, what's something that we can actually implement tomorrow or next week that is going to move us in the direction of this goal that we have, you know, that we're trying to set for ourselves, because there's always something that you can do. There's always something that we can be doing. And so that's how I typically respond, because that does happen quite a bit, especially in municipal government. It's all about where's the money going to come from. And I know that it's the same in a lot of larger organizations. It's not always about the money. Money doesn't always equal action in those spaces. And so finding the things that we can do without having to change resources or find extra resources is always possible.
Excellent. We've just got a couple more minutes left. I'm mindful of that. I want to hop into one of the questions that says, what supports, if any, are there for Vermonters who are diverse in a way as having a disability? So anxiety, dyslexia, ADHD, or mental health diversities. Anybody have any answer to that one?
Admittedly, Jude, I didn't hear, I'm having a difficult time hearing you. I didn't hear the question.
It was around disability. Do we know any supports that are in place for Vermonters with disabilities in particular? Okay, we're going to take silence as nothing on the top of the head. From your own personal experiences, I'm sure they're there, right? But it might not be in our wheelhouse.
I'm happy to speak about some of that. I guess I just want to highlight that I appreciated what you were saying, Jude, earlier around race. This being a conversation not just about race, that there are people of color within communities of disability and every intersection of identity. In terms of mental health, there's some listservs that are helpful to be a part of. There's a BIPOC provider listserv. There's community providers, that are working really hard on making mental health accessible. Look out for programs like Inner Space that's going to be coming out and being more publicized, hopefully soon. Pop-up clinics with mental health screening that prioritize mental health from a liberation psychology standpoint. And then, I'll pause there, but I'm curious about supports if they're looking for specific resources, and if so, hopefully they can email the Howard Center, or if they're looking for how to increase inclusion within that community. I wasn't quite clear on that question.
Okay. Yeah. Apologies to person who asked the question around, is it about attracting people of color to Vermont or making communities more inclusive? Obviously, there's something that we'd said in that piece that didn't quite hit the mark, and deepest apologies, didn't mean to offend there. So if there's anything else that we can do to address that, sorry for the misunderstanding. It is a real challenge going through Q's and A's and making sure that I can extract some things. We just have a couple minutes left. I know Denise is going to come in. We'll keep your questions in the chat. Anything that you can say for some of our teachers that are in the room and what they can do to make sure that their classrooms are welcoming and inclusive to students? Let's end on that note.
I think that's where the student voice really comes in. I think that teachers do such a wonderful job in Vermont of wanting to be welcoming and inclusive. And so we, as educators, we want to try to do everything, right? We want to try to wrap our babies in whatever it is that they need. We don't necessarily ask them what they need when they arrive. We don't actually, I give them the opportunity and the space to just come in and observe and start to feel comfortable. And I think, that's something that definitely, comes to mind with me when I first arrived into my fifth grade classroom. I was instantly bombarded with, we're going to do this to welcome you, and then we're going to have this ceremony, and this thing is going to happen, and this, and it was very overwhelming. It was very much, the teacher asked me to stand up and start talking about my life in Florida. And that was not something that I was prepared for, as a 10-year-old going into a classroom in a completely unfamiliar space. And so while the intentions were absolutely good and they wanted me to feel like, I had the opportunity to share my background, to share who I was, as a 10-year-old, it was not something that I was prepared for, that I even had the skill set for. And so I think that, really giving students the space to find out what they might need when they come into the classroom, instead of having something ready for them the second that they come in, there's a bit of a nuance there. You know, have the materials ready, have their table set up, have their name tag on their table, but don't make assumptions about what their needs are before they even get to the classroom, right? You can have that conversation with them after they've had a chance to just kind of be in that space for a little while. There, you know, I found very much so that kids, even, you know, students even as young as preschool age, are very good at talking about what it is that they actually need if you actually decide to ask them. They do have the words, they do have the vocabulary, and they do have opinions even at a very, very young age. And so having them be a part of that process to develop whatever support system when they're first coming in is, I think, extremely crucial.
I'm just going to chime in and say it'll be great if teachers can pull in professionals of color into the classroom. We like to see ourselves reflected in other people. And I think when I first sort of started to see professionals in positions above my own, where I'm at my point in life, it helps me to realize like that's possible. And so if you guys ever have opportunities to have show and tell or whatever things you have in classrooms, I mean, because I'm thinking back in the day here, definitely look for dentists and lawyers and doctors and, you know, electricians and whatever of color that can come into the classroom so that students can actually see that it is possible to be that if you're a person of color.
That's a great response. It goes back to what Marissa, you're saying with listening. We've got literally just under a minute, just over.
Yeah, you know, this is something pretty central on my mind because I have 3 school-age children. And, you know, I think that it starts with school districts investing in adequate training for their staff, their faculty and their staff, that it starts with ourselves. So if a teacher is not used to seeing or cannot discuss or talk about themselves as a cultural being, I do not have confidence that they can help facilitate that learning and that discussion with my child or other children in the classroom. And I know there are so many teachers that are bombarded with responsibilities and expectations. And so if the school district and other leaders can help support them by making it accessible, not talking about a 1-hour training for the whole school year, and then supporting them in understanding the racial, ethnic, and cultural identity development of children, that starting the discussion when they're already in elementary school is actually late, that it should be in preschool, that children are able to choose, and they do choose playmates based on race as early as being a toddler. And so having materials to teach them, like books where there are protagonists that are diverse, and dolls and toys and colors, like all of the things to really increase inclusion. So it's not just a spotlight on race during February, but it's integrated into overall identity development for them as people.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists, for your time this afternoon, evening. We're very grateful for it. We hope that everybody that's been on the call has enjoyed the discussions, and we look forward to seeing you again at another event. I shall hand back over to Denise.
Hi again, everyone. Thank you all so much. That was a really robust conversation, and I really enjoyed being here with you all. I heard a lot of great stuff. Let's do more community building. Let's listen more. Let's be a mentor, a mentee. Really wonderful suggestions. Thanks so much to our viewers at home, or those of you who might still be in the office sitting with us through dinner. For those folks, I think there was a question that came up just about Howard Center supports and services, always available 24/7, howardcenter.org. And then there are numbers on the screen for our main number, and First Call for Chittenden County, our crisis support. If in the next day or so, we will send a feedback form. It would be really wonderful if you take 5 minutes to help us think through topics for next in the fall and next spring, and give us any other ways that we can improve. So really, thank you. Thank you, Patrick, Jude, all of the panelists. Good night. Be well.